with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome to those of you who joined us here this evening, and to those of you viewing from home. This time I'll ask if there is any public participation. Mr. Brown.
Good evening, Tim Brown from Melody Lane in Farmington. I'd like to start by addressing the board on a warrant article that was mentioned at the last meeting regarding an access road coming in from behind Valley View. My first major concern with such a project and taking $500,000 and dedicating it in a warrant article is the controlling land at the end of Old Bay Road is owned by the town of Farmington. It's also a protected water supply. So in theory, we're proposing to set aside $500,000 for an access road that we don't know whether the taxpayers or the Board of Selectmen would grant access or deed access to the school district out that particular way. The monies are also coming from the state monies that we received, that no matter how you label it, those in the legislative session were earmarked for taxpayer relief from the programs that we've been supplementing over the years that have kind of been downshifted. As part of the budget process, I'd ask the school board to consider, do we need a full-blown emergency access road going out that way, or could we use an alternative? And one of the alternatives that I would propose is we have an emergency fund within the school that every year we set aside 2.5% of the budget. In theory, we'll never be able to spend that money because of the requirements required by the RSA. It requires a specific definition of an emergency. It requires school board authority, DOE authority, and budget committee authority to spend that money. We could, by warrant article, discontinue that emergency fund, which right now has about $180,000 in it. Write a second warrant article to dedicate that money towards an emergency access road that would build upon the current emergency lane that is from the high school parking lot over to the Henry Wilson School. So that would allow, if there were an emergency would occur in Spring Street, emergency traffic, police, fire, rescue, or traffic going out, a school bus with the appropriate repairs would have a secondary means of emergency egress from the school. The second topic of that warrant article was to relieve congestion or to make it a full-time access road. As you're working through the budget process, you'll see that we've gone from 4 drivers on the school bus down to 3. Have we identified what the congestion problem is at the schools? For instance, are parents driving their kids to school because they don't have bus transportation? Or are they driving kids to school because it's convenient for the parent? And we don't have an answer for that. If we're driving kids to school because we bus outside the 1.5-mile range, then with the ability to control all our existing transportation now with 3 buses instead of the 4 we're budgeted, is it worth looking at? Do we change that busing perimeter? Do we drop it down to 1 mile or a half mile? And we're not going to be able to make that decision until survey data from the parents is a parent that says, hey, why are you driving your kid to school? If transportation was available, would you take use of that transportation? And that's going to nip a lot of the congestion that we're seeing around the school in the bud and almost eliminate, not the need for the emergency egress road, because I think egress is important, but the secondary access road for a full-time road. The other thing that hasn't been discussed in a secondary access road is, once we build an access road, do we now need ADA compliant sidewalks? And how much does that boost the cost up? The second part of that state money is infrastructure money. And when you read the definition of the RSA, it's for emergency type protocols. And I'd ask the board to think about the Homeland Security grant that we filed last year that was so critical of our schools for about $300,000 and some change. So now we have infrastructure money that will allow us to meet some of those security upgrades through the infrastructure or the additional $300,000 that's tapped onto the 6 to make those improvements into our schools. and I look at the long-term planning of, what was in the grant, what have we missed, what do we really need to do? Because there's some really beneficial aspects that can take place to make it a safer place for our kids. So if we were to eliminate the emergency fund, we'd still have the ability to have our emergency access road. Potentially with our school buses, we'd be able to keep the budget line the way it is now, but increase services. And we'd still be able to take that $600,000 that was earmarked for taxpayer relief and send it back to the taxpayers. The second part that I wanted to talk about was some of the other bids that are coming in the meeting. Normally, it's procedure for the school board to take public comment at the beginning or at the end. As you're discussing the awarding of bids or some of the other warrant articles that really haven't been publicized, would you entertain taking public comment at that time?
With a low crowd, yes.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Yeah. Did you have a response?
I guess two things on the 2.5% set aside. That's not 2.5% of the budget. That's 2.5% of our valuation, and there is a difference. It's a much lower number.
It's $180,000 that's in the fund roughly
Correct.
right now.
And that changes year to year based on the valuation. Were we to rescind the vote that allows us to retain that, we would have to go back to a vote to be able to do that another time. Just making sure that people understand that. Rescinding that vote then means we don't get to do that until there's another vote that says that we can. And that money is only for that purpose. So if that vote is rescinded, I don't believe we can turn around and take that for another purpose. It is very specifically set aside.
I would beg to differ with you on the fact that once money goes in, so if we discontinue that fund, that money would go back into the fund balance.
The money would be returned to the town at the end of the year, as it is each year.
Once it's in fund balance, just like we did last year, we funded $250,000 worth of warrant articles out of fund balance. So what the process would allow us to do is ask the taxpayers for permission, once that's back into the fund balance, to spend that money for an emergency access road.
I don't believe that's how it works, but I will check with legal.
Thank you. Other public? Mrs. Barron?
Mayor Barron, Ridge Road. I watched most of the selectmen's meeting. I may have missed one or two. Has the board approached the Board of Selectmen for right to pass and repass egress access through the water tower lot? Because it is, according to the tax map, it is owned by the town of Farmington, and there is a 250-foot aquifer protection buffer zone that actually lapses over the parcel that you want to cut through and the one adjacent to it. And I guess my opinion is, before we go and tie up $500,000, maybe the first question would be to approach the selectmen and see if they have any intention whatsoever of turning that. It would have to go to a vote at town meeting. And if it goes to the vote and the voters say, yeah, that's a good idea, we want the selectmen to deed that property over, that's fine. But you also need to know about when you get involved in wetlands and things like that, there are things called avoidance and minimization. Those types of things come into play when you put a contractor on site and they start digging dirt. I have a little familiarity with that. We dig a little dirt now and then. Dealing with wetlands is not impossible, and it's not easy. The inspectors that come out while your construction is going on, and that's not just the water tower property, that's a buffer zone, which is different than wetlands. The wetlands that you have to deal with coming from Valley View down to the high school parking lot and out that way, those are certified wetlands. Those are when you're going to have to follow every letter of the law. If you have a contractor out there digging and an inspector comes by, they can and most likely will issue a cease and desist if they see something that they don't like. and there's a certain amount of turnover time for you to repair that, to stop it and put things back where they were and get it back. The fines in that general area, and don't quote me on this, but I have seen them to the tune of $10,000 a day. So those are the types of things that I guess I would be concerned with before we put $500,000 in a capital reserve and find out 3 years from now, which is about what it's going to probably take before you can even dig dirt. Then find out, yeah, they said no on avoidance and minimization, or the town said no because that's a protected water source. Those are the questions. I know you got a one bite of the apple, but do we tie up that money on an if? And it's not just one if, it's about 6 or 7 ifs. So if you start crossing them off, you get the selectmen to say, oh, sure, you can have that land, no problem. Then you start looking into how you deal with wetlands, and then you start looking into if this is going to be a town road, you can't exceed a 6% grade. You have a much steeper grade between those two. Those are the types of things in my mind. Those questions need to be answered before you go to the taxpayers and ask them to stick that in an account. And also on the other side of that, as we all know, a CRF can only be used for the purpose of which it's originated. 3 years from now, if we go ahead with this and we put the money in and we find out that it can't be done, the money's coming back to the taxpayers anyway. Do the homework. That's all I'm asking. And if all 5 or 6 or 7 perceived issues from my point of view slide right through, then you're golden. But I think your due diligence is to check on some of those first, and I think I'd start with the selectmen because word on the street isn't favorable.
Well, to answer your question, the board has not reached out to the Board of Selectmen. I don't know if administration has or talked to the town administrator at all, but no.
Only brief conversation at the CIP meeting, and that's not official.
Okay.
They would have to decide whether, I believe, they would have to decide whether it becomes a warrant article
For the town.
that goes to the town, because the only people that can actually convey that property
Right.
would be the taxpayers. But the selectmen decide whether or not they're going to go forward, and they have a right, a duty, and a responsibility to protect that water.
Certainly.
The water and the wetlands. So
Certainly.
looking at it from a selectman's point of view is going to be different than alleviating traffic. What I saw a couple weeks ago was a $50,000 CRF for a gated gravel emergency access road. Within 15 minutes, it went to $500,000 year-round paved yellow brick road. And I'm concerned that in 15 minutes that it could move that far. Yeah, the first, Ruth Ellen put 50,000 on, and you were talking about a gravel gated emergency road, right?
It wasn't, originally we were looking at, could we start something here? 50,000 isn't going to do a gated gravel road anyway. Then looking at the fact that we have the $950,000 that are set aside, this year's extra money was set up so that more or less it needed to be returned to the taxpayers unless there was a special meeting called. This next round is giving us opportunities to spend it. It is put in as a one-time grant, but a grant of that amount, I still need to go to the session to get permissions in order to use that. And so that's where that came from. We weren't looking at 50 to start with, no.
Oh, all right.
No.
There was a starting point talking
Right.
about a gated gravel road, and then I said, I don't want to sell something that sounds like it's emergency use only, and then it turns into an access road where we're, doing dismissal and arrival every day.
And dismissal and arrival, with the changes that have happened at Valley View, have been much, much smoother. That's not the biggest issue. The biggest issue is the fact that we have a bottleneck at the end of Thayer Drive that becomes a real issue in an emergency.
Right.
That's our biggest problem right now.
Just throw this out there too. When you get to the point of putting pencil to paper and figuring out what this road entering, if everything passes and you get an entryway onto Bay Road, who's going to pick up the tab for improving Bay Road to take 500 or 600 additional motor vehicles every day? If within 2 or 3 years, the additional traffic going at the intersection of the Water Tower Road and Bay Road, that intersection not only it's got fairly good line of sight right there, but then when you get down to the intersection of Bay Road and Charles, you have that little Y or V right there, which is suicidal now with just the traffic. You know, somebody comes off Bay Road or somebody comes down Charles, that's a very dangerous intersection. So in order to accommodate a road that has year-round usage, I think you have some other issues. Now, maybe you just say, well, we're only responsible to Bay Road and let the town worry about it. But that's horse before the cart in my mind, because if the road that you propose causes the taxpayers to spend big bucks fixing up the Bay Road, Charles Street area to take the traffic, to improve the safety, that road has created the problem, but the taxpayers are still paying it. So don't forget to go that far out to look at further away from your entry ramp, because that road was never, ever built, even though they just repaved it. It was never built to take that kind of motor vehicle traffic. And I can't guarantee it, but my guess would be it would be a very short time before you started to see that road deteriorate due to the increased traffic. Just some points. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Anyone else? Okay, we'll go into approval of minutes. Minutes of September 23rd, non-public session 1. These minutes have been previously approved, but the content of the minutes involved a staff member who has written us a letter, as we've received, and asked that we, in response to the decisions made at this meeting, and asked that we add this letter to the minutes. And how does the board feel about that? I have no problem with it. Okay, so I think we'll just make a motion to add,
To amend the
to
minutes
amend
by
those
adding
by
the-
adding the letter. So can I entertain a motion on that? Motion by Mrs. McElhenney to do that. Second by Mr. Lewis. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Okay,
Thank you.
yep. Public session from November 12th.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Motion by Mrs. McElhenney to approve. Second by Mr. Lewis. Discussion? When we, this is just, I don't want to be too picky here, but I want to make sure that we're still representing what the position is. When Mr. Larkham speaks to the board and is present and speaks to the board, let's call him Dean of Students / Athletic Director, because that's really what the title is.
And then
Please.
Laurel Vachon, his name is spelled with a Y.
Yeah, and Laurel's needs to be,
And also, I want to say in that same thing with Mr. Larkham, isn't that supposed to be Adidas? Okay.
yeah, so page, what is that, 2? Yeah. Third paragraph up from the top there, Adidas. Okay. Any other? All those in favor as amended? And I'm going to abstain. I was absent that meeting.
I'm trying to think of my first name.
All set. Okay, November 12th, non-public session 1.
So moved.
So moved by Mrs. McElhenney.
Second.
Second by Mr. Lewis. Discussion?
I just wanted to make a notation too, on the public minutes that we just approved. It did say that the PowerPoints would be included. I do have those. I didn't reprint them for you because you had those, but I just wanted you to know that I do have those to include with it.
Okay, thank you. Anything on these non-public ones? No? All those in favor?
Aye.
And I'll abstain. Non-public session 2 from November 12th.
So moved.
So moved by Ms. McElhenney,
Second.
second by Mr. Lewis. Any discussion on these? All those in favor?
Aye.
And I'll abstain. Non-public session 3 from November 12th.
So moved.
So moved by Mrs. McElhenney, second by Mr. Lewis. Discussion? All those in favor? I'll abstain.
And your agenda says non-public session 4. I don't believe we had a legal non-public that night. It had been scheduled, but we determined it not needed, so there are not minutes. And because you didn't have a non-session 4, and I believe that's why. So
So it just should have been on.
it was on the
Okay.
agenda, but didn't happen, so.
Okay, November 18th, public session.
So moved.
So moved by Mrs. McElhenney,
Second.
second by Mr. Lewis. Discussion on these. On page 5, my name at the bottom just misspelled, just a typo. The beginning of the. Anything else? All those in favor? Aye. Okay, November 18th, non-public session 2, non-public session 1, I'm sorry.
So moved.
So moved by Ms. McElhenney. I'll second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Aye. Mr. Lewis, yes?
Yeah. Sorry.
Non-public session 2 from November 18th.
So moved.
So moved by Mrs. McElhenney.
Second.
Second by Mr. Lewis. Any discussion?
Just a question. Spirit coach?
That is high school it's,
High school?
yes, high school,
Okay.
hence varsity.
All those in
Aye.
favor?
Aye.
Aye. November 18th, non-public session 3.
So moved.
So moved by Mrs. McElhenney,
Second.
second by Mr. Lewis. Discussion? All those in favor? Aye. November 18th, non-public session 4.
So moved.
So moved by Mrs. McElhenney. I'll second it. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. November 18th, non-public session 5.
So moved.
So moved by Mrs. McElhenney,
Second.
second by Mr. Lewis. Discussion? Oh. Why don't we, at the, second line up from the bottom on page 1, why don't we say the Paraprofessional Association
Okay.
President?
Okay,
It just says Union President. It
Right.
just doesn't really tell us.
so actually it's FESPU?
Well, yeah, whatever the,
Is that correct?
okay. All those in favor as amended? Aye.
Just a quick question
Oh,
about
yeah.
who did the minutes?
These were, all of these were kind of by committee between
Okay.
Penny, Diana, and me.
Oh, no, no worries. I
Yeah.
just didn't see a name on the
So-
form,
I don't know if you want us to put by committee, or this was kind of a
Well, Penny, well, why don't we put
compilation.
Penny, because Penny
Okay,
ultimately,
Penny did the non-public, well, some of the non-publics. Diana did some of the non-publics.
Okay.
Diana and Misty did the publics. So,
all those in favor as amended? Aye. Non-public session 6 from November 18th.
So moved.
So moved by Ms. McElhenney, second by Mr. Lewis. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. And non-public session 7 from November 18th.
So moved.
So moved by Mrs. McElhenney, second by Mr. Lewis. Discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Budget review, we're gonna look at the default.
Okay, so the default budget that you have in front of you, Mrs. Mellon and I met with our attorney to go through and make sure that what we had was in line with what was allowed by RSA and Ed 306 and anything else that was applicable. So we have gone through line by line. The one piece that I do need to have, and it had been it's under old business. It's pertinent to both default and the other budget, so I don't know if you want to move it forward. There's a line here that has some,
It's not in the default.
it's not in the default,
No.
it's in the other one. We can wait. We'll wait till we get to it then. There's a confirmation that I need you to make on one of the lines from the other budget. But this was last year's budget, or this current year's budget, with one-time expenditures removed and lengthy discussion about what we can do moving forward. Is this allowed? Is that allowed? Where are we? We have taken out any positions that have been removed from next year's proposed budget. It does not include those positions. Go ahead.
This hasn't been forwarded to the budget committee yet.
No, it has not,
When
because
will
you
it?
haven't seen it. The Budget Committee has its workshop on the 18th. My thought was if this is approved by the board, that I would take it forward then. Not for the school.
My bad.
That's okay. So, looking at this, knowing that you also have a meeting next week, whether you wanted time to go through it, review it.
Well, that's what I
And
was,
then
that's
vote
why
on-
I asked
vote
about when
on
the
the
budget
16th.
committee window is.
My thought was to take it to the Budget Committee workshop. They're having a workshop on the school budget. I've agreed to go to answer any further questions that they might have. I've forwarded additional information to them. So if the board needs a little bit of time to look this over, that's certainly.
I'd like more time, and I'd also like to have an opportunity for Mr. Frieder and Mrs. Moran, who can't be here this evening, to chime in. Mr. Brown?
Looking at the school budget, I haven't seen the default budget yet. I saw some revenue projections that were submitted to the budget committee. I didn't see any E-rate money in those revenue projections. Is it going to be unanticipated again this year like it's been the last 10 years, or are we going to predict that in our revenues?
What we might have coming in is shrinking, and at this point, I can't predict because I don't know that we're going to have that moving forward.
$1 would be a good suggestion.
I hear it. Thank you.
Let's make, did you want to?
No, I just said,
Oh.
put the budget up again.
You want to table this, put it on next week's agenda so we can
Yeah,
look at it as a whole board?
absolutely.
Okay, so motion to table?
I'll make that motion.
Motion by Mrs. McElhenney.
Second.
Second by Mr. Lewis. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
So we'll put this on next week's agenda.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm going to dissect that. Warrant articles.
So the warrant articles that you have are fairly similar to what you have seen, with the exception of my having gone through and reordered based on our discussion, and then any wording additions from legal that needed to be changed, so that we have the basic framework. I have not included the operating budget totals because we're still looking to include the revenues in the aggregate. And again, you've tabled the default budget, so I don't have that to fit in with the revenues for the aggregate. So I don't have those final numbers, but the shell for the wording for the operating budget for Article 3 is as legal has approved, and that's pretty much boilerplate from the RSA anyway. Article 4, school custodians. Article 5, that would be the bargaining agreement. Article 5 would be conduct special meeting. Article 6, the Farmington Teachers Association collective bargaining agreement. Article 7 would be conduct the special meeting should it not pass. Article 8, the performance contract. Article 9, the high school roof. Article 10, Henry Wilson roof. Article 11, special education trust. Article 12, the bus capital reserve fund. Article 13, kitchen equipment fund. And then 14 and 15 are the ones that have been referenced by Mr. Brown in the secondary access road and the capital improvements. The language there has not changed from what you have seen.
No, why aren't the estimated increases on the custodial Article 4? We have that information now.
We do have that information
Both
now.
ratified by both groups.
Yes, so I can
So-
include that. Yep.
That needs to be in there.
I will have that for you for.
Just to note with the public, we've come to a tentative agreement with the Teachers Association. Still has to be ratified by them, and then once that happens, it'll come before us. Time frame on that, they meeting before next Monday?
Everything goes to them Wednesday and we vote Monday.
You vote next, okay. And which means
We could.
we can
Yep.
put it on our agenda, negotiations, and we could potentially ratify that night as well.
Correct.
And then we would have,
That to
that
go back to,
information.
yes, to
Okay.
include there.
okay.
So again, this
So-
too is more or less informational to see if there's anything else you wanted added as far as language or other warrant articles. And if you want to hold and vote these next week, that certainly makes sense.
I would like to have the dollar amounts definitely put in. But I do have a couple of questions on the Article 14. Since I'll do that. When we talked about the secondary access road, I was under the impression that when we were to make a warrant article, it was just to start the capital reserve fund. Now, this warrant article has a lot more detail, and, you know, they've definitely presented a lot of information tonight and raised a lot of great questions. So can we establish a capital reserve fund without delineating where the access road will go? Can we just state that we would just like to set aside a portion of money and then go ahead and start conducting some of these surveys and speak with the selectmen and see where we're going to go from there?
It can be, yes. It can be more generically designed.
Because this is very specific
It
in
is.
wording,
And I'm thinking that that's,
and, Mr. Brown made a good point of some other areas we could look at, so, yeah, that's a good point.
So just a second, maintenance for secondary access road from the high school and Valley View campuses?
I wouldn't even say, I mean, I would just say
No,
a secondary
location.
access road.
From
At
campus?
this,
Period.
I mean, it's obviously going to be from campus, so I
Well,
mean, as long as we
there's
just. have-
obvious and there's obvious. I mean, there
Yeah.
does have to be some, okay.
I mean, I just don't want to stranglehold on anything.
Yep, I understand that.
And although
But
Mr.
this
Brown-
particular, go
Oh, yeah,
ahead, sorry,
no,
go
no,
ahead,
no.
go ahead.
I was just going to say, although Mr. Brown did raise a question, I mean, a point that the fact that this money, ought to be used to alleviate the taxpayers, I do feel that it would also be in their best interest to put it into a capital reserve fund for the access road, so that further down the line, we are not asking the taxpayers for this money to fund it. That is just my opinion.
So could the wording be a secondary access road from the schools on Thayer Drive? because it's not necessarily secondary access from Henry Wilson, it's the schools that are accessed by their drive that don't have that other egress. Again,
Yeah.
it's your wording, so.
I don't see any issue with that. I mean, essentially, that's
And that's what
the
it
ultimate
is. I mean,
thing
that's-
we're trying to do, yeah.
Mr. Brown?
Given the comment from the superintendent that the congestion issues have been resolved at the schools, do we need a secondary access road, which gives the impression of parents, public being able to drive over this road? Or do we need an emergency access road, which gives us the ability in a crisis at a bottleneck on Spring Street, being able to get kids and medical equipment in and out?
Again, that's a great point. I mean, also, I initially looked at this as an emergency road only. However, again, going forward, without bottlenecking, I'd like to leave it as an access road to give us the option of continuing to fund this capital reserve fund so that in the future, if it starts as a gravel road and we keep adding funds to it and we can eventually perhaps pave it and maybe take a look at the congestion issue, we still have that option. But that's mine.
I think the immediate need is emergency.
I would agree.
The immediate need is an emergency access, really. I mean,
Absolutely.
could it morph into some type of dismissal route? I don't know. But, I mean, I don't want to try to sell something that it isn't or is going to be. But, yeah, I think emergency access is probably a better way of...
That's first and foremost what's needed.
Yeah.
You know, we have an alarm pulled at 2:30 and we're in trouble.
Yeah. But so having said that, and having had this good input tonight from both members of the public who spoke, Mr. Brown and Mrs. Barron, I'd like to table this as well tonight. We're going to be here right next week. We'll have a full board. Hopefully, everyone's feeling well. And we'll also have numbers. We could potentially have numbers from both agreements.
Yes.
And it would be just to be, I'd feel better about voting on them that night. Mrs. Barron? Yep, please.
I don't have a copy of 14. Do you have a dollar amount in that?
500.
It is 500, okay. Okay, thank you.
All right, motion to table.
I'll make that motion.
Motion by Mrs. McElhenney,
Second.
second by Mr. Lewis. All those in favor? Aye. So put this on next week's agenda, please. Mr. Brown?
Just moving on briefly for the performance contract. I'm hearing representations that the energy audit that's being conducted now is being conducted at no cost to the taxpayer. However, when I read the RFP that went out, there's clauses in there that indicate if we award a performance contract, those energy audit costs are rolled into the contract. So my question is it being done at no cost to the taxpayers, or is it a deferred cost that once we pass a warrant article for a performance contract, we're going to pay those costs later on?
Do you have an answer on that?
Well, the way that the performance contract, the whole plan works, typically they ask for a set amount in the event that we did not, they do the energy study and we did not choose to go that route, they would ask for, I think they said the standard amount was 20,000. What we were referring to is we negotiated that there is no amount that the district will owe if we decide not to go with performance contracting. So that performance energy contract cost, what they do for the energy audit, anyone they have to come in, they would wind up eating that cost if we decided not to go with it. I think that might be what you are asking.
I guess my question for the board is, and I don't think a performance contract or any type of board-level work has been authorized, but if we vote to start a performance contract, and from whenever the group of engineers have come in and started their audit to the school, if there's $50,000 in work accrued now, does that $50,000 now become part of that performance contract that we have to pay?
I don't remember it being presented to us
No.
as such.
No.
Okay.
No, my understanding of the way that the RFP works and the way that the contract works is that this initial energy study is, basically they're doing it for us with a no harm, no foul if we decide not to do that. Now, the way that the contract works, and I think the board's seen the presentations, the way that it works is basically you take money from your existing budget that you had allocated for energy, such as oil or electricity or what have you, and any additional monies that you might have available, such as capital reserves or things to put towards that, and you use that to offset interest costs on basically no longer than a 20-year contract for capital improvements. So it's another way, without issuing a bond, without raising and appropriating money annually, to use money that's already been part of the budget and historically has been part of the budget to offset financing costs for bigger projects. Now, how they determine their
I-
cost fee.
I understand the process,
Right.
because I sat through the presentation when I was on the Budget Committee, and I don't have any benefit of seeing any contract that's been secured by either this board or the SAU. But I did have the benefit of reading the RFP, which went out that we had one response to. And in that RFP, it's clear, unless a contract changed it, that any engineering costs that occur during the audit process now become part of that performance contract later on. So my question to the board is the engineering study at no cost to the taxpayers? Or if we award a performance contract, as part of that performance contract, do we now owe monies for engineering studies going on now?
I believe that to be the case because the costs of, we wouldn't have to pay if we didn't go with performance energy contracting. But if we did, I believe that the costs that they are incurring would become part of it. But there has been no contract signed. That's why the article's on for the taxpayers to vote and decide whether they want to pursue that direction.
But I guess
So-
Mr. Brown's point is if the town votes to do that, costs,
What's the amount
what
would be
they've
the
done so
cost?
far would be in there.
I don't know that we'll have that because it's an 18-month, it's a process.
process.
To do that. So I don't know that we could say what the front-end cost of it. It depends on how much work they do.
And that's what scares me is, as a legislative body or an elected body, you're not defining what that scope of work is. How do we have engineers going into our schools now, looking under cracks under doorways, and providing engineer studies when we don't know what that cost is going to be in 12 months? And if we don't have a contract, how are they even in the building without a workman's comp bond, naming the school board or the school as secondary insured? Have we had backgrounds done of these engineers? Because they're working in the building unattended, access to
They're not unattended. They're accompanied by custodial staff, just as when we have somebody that comes in to service the boiler or anything
Do they have a
else.
workman's comp certificate that's been filed with the district?
They're not performing a contract for us. They're viewing the building.
Sounds to me like they're working if we're going to get billed later on. I just don't, I don't see an act of the school board saying, okay, bring your engineers in to do this audit study that we're going to end up paying later on. I don't understand the process of how this whole thing was started. It went out for RFP, we had one response, the school board was made aware of the one response, and as far as I can see in minutes and in televised sessions, it stopped there. But we have people performing work in our building now that potentially we're going to get billed later on. And that's not at no cost to the taxpayer.
A letter of intent was signed to say that we intended to look at the process.
And
because
that was with the board's
board's approval.
Right, but can we try to find out thus far what that dollar figure is? It'd be, I don't know if that's something you can do with them, Larry, or somebody.
There's only been 2 people in so far.
Right.
Okay.
And
Well,
it's just at the
then,
very
early enough that we
beginning.
can, well, let's just, I mean,
An estimate? I mean, I could probably ask them what an estimate might be.
Can you do a not to exceed?
I don't know if that's how it works. I was under the impression that it's a very fluid concept. They were willing to come in and do the groundwork, but until they're on site, I don't think that they really knew what they were dealing with. And I think that,
Part of it's what the.
Right.
Is all.
Well, that's how it was presented, but what's the reality? Mr. Brown?
They've also
Too many
used some of our
questions down
existing
this end, they're not
engineering
sure.
studies, like our infrared that we already had done, our utility bills. So a lot of the data that we have provided to them has been data that we already have paid other people to gather.
So did the board authorize the preliminary work, I guess is one of my questions that's ongoing.
We had that letter of intent,
Yep,
yeah.
yep.
That there was a vote taken on by the school board to exercise that, because I don't remember
I
seeing it
believe
in
so.
a public meeting.
That letter.
There was a vote.
Do we know?
I have to go back and
Look at the date.
get the date, but there was a
Yeah.
vote.
I believe we voted on that letter of intent.
to at least begin the
Right.
process
To begin-
and lay the
to begin the
groundwork.
engineering
Because in that
study.
letter of intent, and I didn't bring it to you until we had that amount negotiated to zero. Remember that?
Oh, that's, right.
So I didn't bring it to you when there were
Yeah.
dollars on it. I only did
That
that
was a
after
while
we
ago.
negotiated to zero. So it has been a while.
Yeah. Let's look, let's research that, see what that was. Oh, Mrs. Barron, sorry.
I can't work from memory, so I actually have the RFP. I think my biggest concern is, I heard the number 20,000. This talks about if an energy performance contract is not executed after the audit has been accepted, the customer, that's us, agrees to pay the cost of the audit.
Right, and that's what we wrote into the letter of intent. They took that clause out. That-
So
And we
Yeah.
have that in
So
writing.
they plan on.
We have that in writing.
Let's say 6 months from now, we get their report, we say, no, we're not gonna do this, it's too much money.
We walk away.
We don't owe them anything.
We don't know.
Correct.
We don't
We
know
have
many.
that in
We
writing.
walk away.
So that would roll into the next paragraph. So I'm assuming that the RFQ was changed in between when they.
No,
No,
we had one bid. In the process of going back, we have the bid, and then in
negotiated.
getting.
Well, that's what I meant.
That was negotiated down to no cost to the district.
Okay. That's if we decide to not go ahead with the performance contract. The next paragraph talks about if the contractor and the customer do execute an energy performance contract, the fee for the detailed energy audit shall be incorporated into the contractor's project costs in the energy performance contract and paid through the performance contract funding mechanisms. Is that still zero? If you move forward to a performance contract, is zero going to be paid like it says in the RFQ? The fee for the detailed energy audit shall be incorporated into the contractor's project cost. So let's say it's 20 grand, you talked about that. It went away if we part ways. Did it go away if Siemens is awarded a performance contract, or is that 20K now come back on and be added percentage-wise to the different projects that we do? Is it totally gone, it's always gonna be zero? Or as a business organization, are they gonna hold our feet to the fire? And the follow-up question to that would be, that's why my concern in putting this out there would be, we don't know if it's 2 grand or 2 million. We don't know. And at some point, with all the caveats that are in the RFQ, if this happens, then we pay that. If that happens, then we don't pay this. With all of those, I would want to know what kind of money, if somebody snatches the reg, what money is on the table?
Right.
Is it 2 grand?
So-
Is
It
2
doesn't
million?
sound like that part's gone, no. Correct?
So
No.
if we go to a performance contract, whatever we're running the bill up right now and until they're ready to present, that will then be dispersed throughout the multiple projects that we take on, correct? So it's only zero if we part terms. Otherwise, it's whatever they come up with, and that's an unknown number. That's scary.
Well, that's,
So-
go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was just going to say that, so for the purposes of this warrant article, this is for this year, right? And there is no taxation to anybody in this year. Any projects that would be taken on in the future, as part of the projects, those projects would be priced out in aggregate based on what we have available. So if we decided on, an example, if we were going to do the windows, there would be a gross cost that would be associated with that. We would have we would allocate, we basically, they present us with options based on this energy audit. If you do the windows, this will be the cost, this will be your interest cost. If you don't do the windows and you choose these two other projects, this is what it is. So it's like levers that go up and down. This body would, and the board would decide which projects to pick based on the funding. It's not that they would just tell us, here's what we're going to do and here's your bill. It still is something that they present the options to you. You pick and choose among those
But
options.
once a project is picked, Mrs. Barron's question is,
Will some
will some of this previous audit work be tucked in there
Yeah.
as part of the cost?
you have lines
And-
1 through 6 for
Yeah.
the windows?
And
Is
it's-
line
and it-
7 going to be?
Right.
And
Yeah,
since
I
that
have to
part
agree.
wasn't negotiated to zero, then let's try to find out, I mean, let's talk to them about an estimate.
Yeah.
What do these audits cost? Or break them down if they want, or give us so that we could potentially do a,
My understanding is that,
Cap.
like, if we did pick a couple of projects, the part of the energy audit that they would be charging us for would be rolled into the cost of that. When they present us with the option to choose it, the cost would be included in there. So that cost item would take effect in that project as part of the project.
but
So
is
as
there
you
a
go
way to
along.
get just an idea of
what
what
an
that
energy costs?
audit
Yep.
piece
We
would
can-
cost us?
Yep.
And I've
And
also.
maybe they break it down for each project, I don't know, but.
And I've also spoken with superintendents in other districts who have done this type of project, so I can reach back to them and say, can you give me what the breakdown was on your project?
Well, they've done enough
So
of
that-
these
Right.
for a
No.
district our size.
But to be able to say, okay, so they spent this much and theirs was this, so that
Yeah.
you have some comparison as well, that you can see how else this
But I'd have
has
both
worked.
sides.
Let's find that information out in a week if we can, since
Absolutely.
they're in here, and get it on next week's agenda, since we're gonna be revisiting warrants.
And just in the next paragraph following that, it talks about how the different things are going to be paid. That Siemens is going to be paid by the savings that we gain. And that's a great idea. I can get on board with that. I guess, let's say, let me just throw this out there. If we choose a $1 million project, and their savings estimate on that $1 million project is 2%, it's going to take us 50 years to pay them, because 2% of the million.
It can't be longer than 20. That's a law. That's per this RSA.
So at 20, they walk away
No?
No.
having not been paid for 3/5 of it?
No, they set up, this is what you can do within this amount with what you have for the savings, and they guarantee us X amount of savings. And so in the event that we don't realize the amount that they have guaranteed, they eat the difference. If we exceed the savings, then we have that additional savings to apply to the project, should we so choose, or it comes back into what we're doing down the line. But they will say, you are guaranteed this amount of savings that can be applied to this project. If we don't meet that, then they eat the difference.
Energy-saving measures which, if implemented, will provide the customer with cash savings sufficient to fund the customer's payments of all costs and fees associated with the performance contract, including, 1, the fee associated with the detailed energy audit. So there it is again.
Right.
There's a-
And
there's a-
it is part of.
It's a component
yes.
of it, but
So when we tell people that the audit is not costing the taxpayers anything, that's correct. It is not.
And
But
it's
it
not in
will.
this year.
Not in
But
this.
it will. The energy audit will come back on the table as the projects move forward.
And will be paid from
for
the cost
savings
savings
on the energy.
of the energy that is being saved because of the improvements. And so, as you read that, it also said, this is those guaranteed energy savings that will allow the district to be paying for those improvements.
Okay.
So while I guess a better way to say it is at no point are we looking to say, we're adding X number of dollars to the general operating budget in order to pay for X, Y, and Z. If we are able to take those additional funds from the one-time grant from the state and put those into capital reserve, either for additional roof pieces or to put that toward additional components of this performance project, we could expand what we are capable of doing. However, we are not required to do that.
Right.
The other side of that is, if the audit were to truly be zero, then that percentage rolled into each project would be zero.
Correct.
So
Right.
that the savings, which would be returned to the taxpayers at the end of the project, the savings, or the net amount that we don't need to use the savings money to pay the auditors. We keep that savings money for additional projects, for maybe a little bit more than we expected to be able to do. So the key to me is the question of what is the audit costing? Whether it's not, we don't write them a check, but we get less savings returned to us. So that's a cost.
There is a cost there. It is not a cost that is an immediate raise in appropriation. You're correct.
So it's not-
And the question here is, while we have been able to negotiate that so that should the town say, no, we walk away from it and there's been no outlay at this point. With the extent of the engineering studies that we really need to have done to know that we're doing this right. I don't want to go, it's not my expertise. I can look at the windows in Henry Wilson and go, yep, we need new ones. But I'm not the one to go in and say, and it's this one and why and what we need to do in what order. That study needs to be done so that this gets done right. And so while, yes, there will likely be a cost associated with it if we move forward with this, it's an important component in order to do this right. And I would argue that
I totally agree.
it's, we can't do it well without it.
I totally agree, but I think my concern was people...
To know what it is.
People are, I would kind of like to know if we're talking $2,000 or $2 million. And I think that people are getting the opinion, hey, they're doing this for nothing.
Yeah.
When in fact, it may be second, third, fourth, fifth level out there. They will be recompensated for the work that they're performing now. My second question, well, whatever.
We're not counting.
Is this is potentially going to go on for 20 years? Because as I understand it, the savings right now are going to be used to keep the ball rolling. At some point, Siemens says, thank you very much, it's been real. Then the savings come to us.
It's a 15 to 20-year contract.
So
And at that point, once we determine the length of the terms, and so obviously if we do it more quickly, we would need to be generating a little bit more upfront to get things paid off more quickly. But then at the point that we are still seeing savings from that, those are ours. So if we, pay off a brand new boiler system in 15 years instead of 20, then we have 5 years worth of savings.
So technically, we have the potential to not see the savings back in our checkbooks via taxation for 20 years.
But what you are seeing is those upgrades that are allowing us to do that, because should we just go on the way that we are,
Yeah, you're a whisper and a prayer away from my...
Yes, we are.
I totally get it. I'm just trying to get it in my mind so that I can see when you push a balloon down in a bathtub of water, it's going to pop up somewhere else. And that's what I'm trying to see is where is it coming up. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Brown? I know, I just wanted to make sure that you had them.
Just a quick follow-up. I don't think we'd ever bring in a roofing contract to repair our roofs and say, bill me when you're done and let me know what it costs. And this is the impression I'm getting of what's going on with the performance contract. The other thing I'd keep in mind is, and I agree with the performance contract concept, I support it, but let's talk about long-term planning. You're talking 15, 20 years. What is the board's plan on Henry Wilson, which is our oldest school? Is that school, long-term planning-wise, 15, 20, 25 years, 10 years, ever going to be replaced with a new building? So does it make sense to invest in a performance contract when most of your expenses at Henry Wilson, when potentially in 10 years we'll be talking about replacing the school? So you need to balance both ends before we make this investment in all the maintenance, that we're bound by 20 years or 15 years. What's our long-term planning on our building structure?
And I think part of that is we need the engineering studies to know for certain where we're going. Because for us to say, yes, we know that now without this information, I think would be premature.
Yeah, I mean, we're probably at that point where we need to start. I mean, that's built in 60, right?
My sister graduated from that building, the first class in
Oh.
1961.
Depends what part you look at.
61.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because Joe Petrie always said he was the first class, I think, to graduate from there or something.
My
it
sister
took 'em-
Pat was
took 'em many
in
years.
61.
Okay.
In June, the stage wasn't completed, so they actually had to have the graduation at the town hall.
Okay.
Because they couldn't use the gym to
Yeah.
do it there. 62 was the first year they actually graduated in the building.
Yeah, it's getting up there. All right. Policies. GBK and GBKR.
Okay, so there are,
Looking for a first read.
and actually there are 4 policies that are in your packet. The 3 that are JBK, JBKR, and JKR are 3 that are in line with what we are looking to solidify for our staff handbooks, and also the progressive discipline policy is required by the Department of Labor for our safety plan. Safety plan. Because it outlines the progressive discipline process, counseling and verbal warning, written warning, suspension and final written warning, recommendation for termination, and the appeals process, which is more or less outlined in CBAs, but we have staff who are not covered by CBA. And this is fairly generic in the outlining of what's done, but it is included in our safety policy because it's considered not only safety for the employees, but also if this is outlined and followed, perhaps we can keep a grievance from reaching a state where someone is not in a good place.
I'll entertain a first read motion on this. Motion by Mrs. McElhenney to accept all 3 as a first read.
And those that are for R, those are both procedures.
Yeah. Okay.
Rather than policy.
Wow.
But they become part of the policy
Right.
book, but they are procedural rather than.
Okay. The second by Mr. Lewis. Any discussion? All those in favor as a first read? Aye. Why is
And then-
this is GHAR has been adopted.
GHAR was put into policy at your last meeting.
Right.
However, we did not have letters, nor did you have the formal language. You had the intention and you passed it as, here's what we're doing.
Yeah.
Now I'm bringing back to you, here's the alphabet soup to attach to it.
Okay.
And the format that would then go into the policy manual.
Yeah.
I had to go back and look, that's why you do have an adopted date on there, but I needed to get final numbering nomenclature just for this to be ratified in its final form.
There's a
So what do
motion
you-
as such.
Okay.
I'll make a motion to accept GHAR insurance bylaws as presented.
Motion by Mrs. McElhenney,
Second.
second by Mr. Lewis with the additional amounts. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Thank you.
Acceptance of donations.
What about minutes that we have in here?
Those are actually, those are because they're
Those are further down, that's old business.
older.
Oh, okay,
We didn't, yeah,
just check.
probably should.
Yep. I separated them because of
Yeah.
where they come
Nope,
out.
nope, that's fine.
Okay, so on the first one, I have a Donors Choose donation that was made to a first grade classroom of Chromebooks and accompanying software for those Chromebooks. The total amount of that donation is $1,418.13. And that would need to be accepted by the school board for use in school.
Well,
Yes.
I'll make a motion to accept it, but then I just have a question.
Motion to accept, second by Mr. Lewis. Discussion.
How many Chromebooks are we talking about?
Okay, this includes the Chromebooks. The amount of the Chromebooks were $474, so that was 2 Chromebooks. And then there was quite a bit of additional software. The software and the other pieces totaled $900.
And they're new?
They're
Brand new
new,
Chrome,
yes,
so
brand new.
nothing on them? So
Correct.
it's not like a used one coming in
Correct.
with...
And it's more, Chromebooks, there's not a lot of other pieces that can go on them, but it's additional access to software licenses that they have for online licenses as opposed to hardware that is, or software that is installed on the Chromebook.
So I guess the other comment I just want to make is, for the budget, how many Chromebooks did we have slated in this upcoming budget for first grade?
First grade was not in that rotation.
No.
And I believe these are being used for for centers within that classroom. This is specifically for Mrs. Schoonmaker's class.
Okay. Any other further discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Take them.
Fire tablet?
We are tabling that one
Oh.
at this point. I do not have the rest of the information.
Okay, motion to table.
So moved.
So moved by Mrs. McElhenney. I'll second it. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Farmington Women's Club?
We wanted to graciously accept their donations to the principals' funds as of this year. They came and did a formal presentation ceremony at Henry Wilson with all 3 principals. We have pictures and wanted to say thank you. The amounts are within my purview to accept as superintendent, but I certainly wanted to make sure that we said a huge and heartfelt thank you to everything that the Women's Club has done to support us, not just monetarily through the principal's funds, but in all sorts of different ways throughout the year. And so this is a big thank
Got
you.
it.
So we don't need to vote
Thank you.
on it. You
No,
can accept it,
I can
but
accept it. This is just
This is an
that I need
acknowledgement.
to absolutely acknowledge and sincerely thank
Thank you.
them for that.
Thank you, the Women's Club, Mr. Brown.
Wait a minute. How's he fit into the women's club?
Principal fund, just jot a topic that's near and dear to my heart. When we went a number of years without audits, one of the deficiencies in the audits was unaccounted for revenue and expenses in some of the student activity accounts. This year, we changed the audit company, who is renowned for student activity accounts policies. So I guess my question is that missing money, or the undocumented money and expenses, ever been found or looked at?
Do you want to? I mean, I can certainly.
I certainly have read back through the recent audits, but I did not see any finding of missing monies or revenues in any of our audit findings in the last 5 catch-up ones. There were some deficiencies in internal controls, but there was no mention of missing money as far as I am, as I have been made aware.
The technical verbiage in the single-page audit was undocumented revenues and expenses in the student activity accounts.
Right.
So.
If I need to forward that a single page, I'd be happy to do
That
it.
doesn't mean it's missing. It just means that the backup documentation that would have supported those items wasn't there. And I can, if you would like, I can speak to what we've done since February.
Absolutely.
I started February 11th, 5 days after.
Just-
Well, I just want to give you your.
You're talking about what's happening now. My question is was the undocumented revenue and expenses ever documented?
The documentation, there were internal controls where additional documentation was not included with some of the deposits. It doesn't mean that anything was missing. It means that they were looking for us to have additional pieces included with our process, which has now been corrected.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Okay, bid acceptance, Henry Wilson lockers, security cameras, and swipe card system.
The security cameras and swipe cards, I'm going to ask for you to table. We need to go back to the vendors with some additional questions before we have apples to apples that we can present to you. But here is the piece for the lockers.
What? Well, so we're looking at, okay, so we're tabling,
Looking to table the
Right.
security cameras and
okay.
swipe cards. This is for
So
the
motion
lockers.
to table security camera and swipe card system bid acceptance.
So moved.
Put on next week, we have it for next week?
I don't know that we will.
We'll try to.
I'll let you know. Yep.
All right, motion by Mrs. McElhenney, second by Mr. Frieda. All those in favor? Aye. All right, locker bid.
Mr. Gordon, do you need a copy?
Larry Gordon, Facilities Director. We went out to bid for the quotes on the lockers, replacement lockers at Henry Wilson, which we received only 2 bids back. One was from A+ Athletics, which is a company we've worked with quite extensively. They do our gym inspections every year and basketball hoops, bleachers, everything. The other bid was from Hertz Furniture Company, which is was out of New Jersey, I believe, when we dealt with them over the phone and through emails. We did a rating system here, and basically A+ Athletics, its total cost was $32,000. Hertz Furniture was $29,139.46. But taking things into consideration, the lockers that A+ Athletics, they're a higher grade steel. His was all inclusive, even in the bid it included the disposal of the lockers with his own dumpsters, so it would be no charge for us to get rid of them in our dumpsters. That wasn't brought up with Hertz. But with everything, it's a difference of $2,860.54. But our recommendation is that we go with A+ Athletic bid, as they had a higher scoring in the following areas: previous experience with us, overall comprehension of the project, and quality of materials.
This is the entire building?
This is the 8th grade.
Seventh and
7th, 8th grade.
7th,
UA
8th
hall.
grade wing,
7th, 8th grade wing and down the UA hall.
down UA hallway, and then locker rooms?
No,
No,
no. It's just the hallway lockers.
okay. Do I have a motion, or?
I will make a motion to go with Hertz Furniture. A+ athletic bid.
Motion by Linda to go with the recommended bid of A+ Athletics in the amount of $32,000. Second by Mr. Frieda. Discussion. Where's A+ Athletics out of? Are they?
They're local.
New
It's
Hampshire.
Dan Pike. They're out of Rollins.
Rollinsford.
Yeah.
Rollins.
Any other questions or discussion?
Anyway, I don't even know what the boys, girls locker room goes like. Anyway, are there any decent ones you can?
No, these are all
They're
lockers
fitted
that are in the wall,
Yeah, in the wall.
that are built in.
They are in tough shape.
Oh, I know.
Yes. And these would
Those
be.
are probably in 1962, huh, Mary?
Yes, they're the originals. With a couple of coats of paint, hold them together.
Okay, any other discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Oh,
What,
this is in the budget already?
It was a warrant article last year.
Okay,
Yeah.
just want to make sure.
So is that for?
Yeah,
that was 4.
yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Policy BEDG. These are new. And policy BEDGR.
So these were per request. There had been a request to look at the minutes or our policies for access to minutes, public records, and minutes. So you had asked me to bring those back to you, hence the inclusion in the packet.
Mrs. Moran, didn't she ask? Yeah. These were adopted, what, 2.5 years ago. I think I'll ask that we, I kind of wanted Penny to be here to talk about this because she's the one that requested it.
They've already been approved, so what
Yeah.
is it that she wanted them brought forward for? I'm drawing a blank.
I believe there was some discussion around our process of processing minutes and having them posted.
Wasn't there a timeline? Period
is outlined-
that she questioned or
Which is
something?
outlined.
But considering she's not here, I'd definitely make a motion to table, just so she can have some further input in case she had something else she wanted to add.
Yeah, because I want us to go over these and there are some. Okay. Motion to table by Linda.
Second.
Second by Butch. All those in favor?
Aye.
I should have said Miss McElhenney and Mr. Lewis. Sorry.
You've been called worse.
Yeah. Audit committee.
This had come up for discussion, and the general consensus was that you wanted to look at a workshop to go through and set up your components for the audit committee, look at what that might entail as far as the, your charter for that particular group and your charge to the group. There's been no further discussion on that, and there has been some inquiry as far as where's that going? How's it
Yeah.
moved forward? Did you want to set a date for that workshop? Do you want me to see about having any other information provided to you for that workshop? Wanting to kind of nail down next steps.
I thought we talked about having, did we talk about someone coming in from the firm and talking to us about, no?
And they're not going to do that.
But they're
piece.
recommending it.
They're recommending that it be done. They have given us other audit committee members to talk to, but they themselves cannot say, here's how you set up your audit committee, because the audit committee is overseeing part of what they do. So they've
Right.
said, you should have one, but
then they can't tell us, and here's your committee.
No, I understand that. What I had expected was someone to, whether it be someone from another school district that has audit committees that we could talk
And
to about.
I have some names that I can reach out to.
We've even
and
had
see-
folks volunteer to be on it.
Right, so I have, if we wanted, I don't know if with your workshop you wanted to invite those who were interested, if you wanted to have the conversation first with existing audit committee members and then reach out to those who, once you have some foundation laid, I mean, you have some options, but just wanted to make sure that it didn't fall off the table.
The one thing that I thought I recalled was that you kind of have to develop your charter before you start picking members, because part of your charter tells what credentialing you need your members to have. And there are very specific guidelines that they've offered out. It's not anybody that can review financial statements, so that, they make suggestions of certain kinds of backgrounds that might be helpful to you on the audit committee. You can certainly have, volunteers to serve on it, but the whole point is that the committee's supposed to be providing oversight over professional auditing firms and your business office. So it would have to be somebody with some specialized knowledge.
Do we have examples of charters?
I have one that I had provided to, I have a couple that I provided to you in minutes or in packets earlier this year, and I can certainly bring those back. I can reach out to the School Boards Association and see if they have additional examples beyond what's been suggested to us by the school districts I've been in touch with. Plodzik is not handing us anything because of their obvious limitations.
Does the board want to do a workshop?
I think it would benefit us.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful. The information that we did get at that last meeting, delineating the fact that we need a charter first and outlining the type of people that we would look to attract, I want to say that kind of almost had an outline to it, didn't it?
It did.
So if we could, I don't know if you were here for that meeting, though, but if we could get that back, I think that would be a
Sure,
great...
so you'd like me to bring back, just kind of put that in the next packet so that
Yeah.
you've got it closer? Yep,
And then I
can
think,
do that.
when we review it, we can at least initially make an initial workshop.
Let's bring
or
that
a
for
first-
Monday, and then we'll set a date for a workshop.
Okay.
Make it
And
after
do you
budget
want
season.
me to reach out to see if I can have anybody who might be willing to, they might not be able to be here Monday, but to see if there's
the
anybody who'd
workshop.
be willing to
Yeah.
come talk to you at the workshop?
Yeah.
Okay.
Great.
Who's the nearest school that has this moved on, do you know?
I know that Wyndham does, and they're the ones that I've been in the most contact with. I've talked to a few others that have played with the idea, but they are not as far down the road. Wyndham's is probably the most solid that I've seen. But I will certainly
They're not more
do
common?
some more digging. They're not as common as I was led to believe. I think they are suggested, but I think the daunting task of getting them up and running has perhaps kept a few school boards at status quo. But I think it's an important step to take to make sure that we're where we need to be. So,
All right, well, let's put that on there for next week.
Okay.
Online model charter.
There are, yes, yep. And so I will bring those from near and far. And how many models would you like? I don't want to inundate you.
I don't want to be inundated.
Okay.
Well, if
I
you-
think
3 or 4,
mean,
just
it's
as
3, I would
comparison?
say.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I will do that.
Budget line confirmation, bus
Yes.
salaries.
Okay, so on the budget that you have approved, line 10, 2700, 5170, 0077, 00000, salaries, comma, bus drivers. It's the first one in the 17, it's
Yeah.
2700 line. Has a comment in there that says there is down one position from budgeted in SY '20. Now, it's not, the most grammatical thing in the world, and it shouldn't be there. We are not down a position, we are down a driver that we need, because when Lynn came in as bus coordinator, her position was never filled. So she took over the coordinator's
Right.
position, but her position as a driver wasn't filled. So in that, could we benefit from an additional driver? Certainly. Has the position been eliminated? It has not. We have restructured what we have with our 3 full-time drivers to cover many of the positions that we had piecemeal throughout the day. So our basic structure has changed, but this note should not be there. And what I don't want moving forward is that to be construed that we have cut a position, because we have not. We've restructured our payment, but we have not cut a position. So I would like there to be, because I missed this, and when this came up, it was, oh dear, this is not what it should have been. So I would like a confirmation that this position was not cut in our budget process, just so that I have that moving forward and can confirm that with the budget committee as well.
But that route is still being covered by Lynn herself?
It is. It
And
is,
it's
yes.
it's an arrival and dismissal route?
Yes, it is. And so at this point, I'm not looking.
Is that her only routes during the day?
She picks up a couple of other routes because she's picked up some of our homeless transportation as well. And so at this point, we are still doubled up because we've had drivers who are down. I don't have a substitute driver. So in that, I have no wiggle room. If someone sneezes, we're really tough on trying to get our routes covered. We've just managed, but what I don't want it to be is that we're down a position from what was budgeted this year. We're not. We haven't cut a position, I guess, is what I want to make sure it's not construed as. What we have this year is what we're moving forward to for next year. There's not a position that was cut.
You have a question about that, Mr. Brown?
The superintendent presented the budget process at the last budget committee meeting, and under school year 20 budget to 21 cycle, under transportation, it says overall decrease of 19%.
Yes.
We have changed our billing with 3 full-time drivers. We're able to cover the majority of the daytime trips during the contracted hours. Repairs have been reduced with new buses, and we anticipate the purchase of a new bus. So the presentation that went before the budget committee says we're down 19%. How do you go down 19% without cutting? And it creates the impression that we went from 4 drivers down to 3 by doubling up.
Right, and that's what I wanted to make sure that we corrected that piece. What we have done is, as opposed to in previous years, there were trips during the day. If it's a 2-hour trip, it was paid as a 2-hour differential. If we have someone come in, we have to pay them at least 2 hours minimum based on Department of Labor standards, rather than have piecemeal trips being paid out and then have that go into overtime for someone. We have 3 drivers who are now full-time during the day that are able to do that without our piecemealing out and paying the additional costs. We've changed our pricing structure. We have 3 drivers who are full-time. We did not have that structured that way in the past.
But are we budgeted for 3 drivers full-time or 4 drivers full-time?
3 drivers full-time and 1 bus coordinator.
But we also have a bunch of part-time.
We have a bunch of part-time drivers as well, but we have 3 full-time drivers this year and will again next year.
But one of those driver positions is combined with a bus coordinator, so,
That's the 4th full-time driver,
okay.
yes.
Okay. Public participation?
Well, hold on.
Oh.
Can I have a confirmation of
Oh,
that
we have to,
then,
oh, you
please?
want us to basically vote a confirmation?
I do want to vote a confirmation
Okay.
so that that's,
So is there a need or not? You're getting by now with 3 drivers. One of those 3 is the coordinator. as well.
That's my 4th full-time. I do
But
have
it's-
other
But
part-time
you
drivers.
don't have 4 full-time currently.
I have, if you would count Lynn, my bus coordinator, I have 4 full-time.
And so you need 5 full-time.
I need at least a good substitute so that if I have somebody who's out sick, we're not stacking kids like cordwood. But at
But a
this point,
substitute's not a position.
correct. At this point, I'm not looking for another full-time position here. We still have a need for someone else to drive, at least part-time. We are having a very difficult time covering our out-of-district homeless runs. We're having a very difficult time if anyone is out sick for any reason, and we've been down a driver because of a long-term illness. And so that's likely to be resolved soon. But our out-of-district runs are tough. We're having to look at some very creative solutions.
I'll give you a creative solution. No, really. I've never understood, and Mr. Brown, maybe you know actually about this, being that you have a background in police work. If we're gonna, why couldn't we access nearby drivers in other towns?
Because right now...
I get that they have to have a background check. They've got one cleared at Newt High School, but they have to have one cleared here. I don't get that, but
It's in
whatever.
the process of going through legislation right now.
Okay.
Currently, a driver is only allowed to appear on the roster for one district. They're not allowed to be rostered in multiple districts. They're in the process of trying to change that. So, because way back when, we used to be able to help Newt out, they would help us out. And
But are they but if they're a substitute, are they considered a rostered bus driver?
If they, I believe so.
I checked that.
But right now, I don't even have somebody who's willing to, do part and part.
But I mean, what I'm saying
But
is
they're looking at changing that so that we can share rosters.
if we're willing to cover the background check for a neighboring bus driver who's home from 10 to
Right.
2 and we have a run in the middle of the
Right.
day or something.
And right now, we're not allowed to do it, but they're trying to change that legislation so we can, because exactly that reason.
Trips too.
Absolutely, because
A lot of districts try not to, they don't want their bus drivers to get into
Right.
overtime, but so if you're crossing over,
Right.
it's
so this is where we're hoping that moves quickly. It can't move fast enough as far as I'm concerned. Right
Okay.
now, what we've ended up doing is occasionally we've had to contract with other districts to back and forth, and we do that with homeless
So
transportation as well.
we're confirming,
That this notation, there is down one position from budgeted in SY20, shouldn't be there on so many fronts. One, grammatically, but two, content-wise. There is,
You want to
that
leave the note, but the
should be
money stays
stricken.
the same?
The money stays the same. I want the note stricken.
So I'll make the motion to confirm that line's decrease is solely due to internal restructuring rather than the loss of a position.
Correct. Thank you.
okay, so moved by Mrs. McElhenney, second by Mr. Frieda. Got that wording? Ms. Gazer? All right. Okay. Any further discussion?
Back in the old days, the AD was the athletic bus driver. You remember that, Mr. Shagnon?
No, I'm not old. All those in favor? Aye.
Well, there's been discussion that I should be getting my CDL, so.
Public participant, Mr. Frieda.
I apologize for being late.
Did we talk about the delegate assembly from the New Hampshire School Boards Association?
No, we did not.
No. So everybody got an email. I just want to bring it up. It's Saturday, January 25th. It's a day-long event from 10 a.m. till 3:30, and they are going to be voting on things. So we've been invited to send a delegate or a member. So we should decide who we want to send and send them.
I'm gonna vote for Penny because she's not here.
I was thinking the other way around. Who brought it up? We have some time, but I'm just saying.
When do we have to? inform.
It's not until January 25th, so
Right.
we certainly have some time to
Do you need to
register.
RSVP and let them know?
There is a registration that it's free, but there is a registration that you have to let them know you're coming, so
Okay.
just wanted to make sure.
We can bring it up next week when we're all here.
And get,
Can more than one of us go?
I'm sure anybody can go who wants to go.
As long as you don't end up with a quorum.
I think we might have
Right.
one voting person only from us, but
But two of us could go
I
without.
think we can
Right.
go.
Okay.
So you'd like
Right.
that added to agenda
Yeah,
next
just,
week?
we'll talk about
And
it.
it's,
Is
and
the
you got
agenda
an
6
email from
pages
them,
now?
so-
We're going?
It's
Not really.
approaching.
Not bad.
Well, wait till we see what we add to it next week.
Public participation?
Ouch!
And I'll make it quick, but this is an issue near and dear to my heart. You guys tabled the video camera and card key bid for tonight. Call me weird, but I read the bid specs. As we talked earlier, if the board is going to entertain possibly taking some of that infrastructure money, which was designed by the legislative body to go to safety improvements, before you make decisions on this upgrade, look at the big picture. What I saw absent in that bid proposal is this technology out there that will tie the key cards, and it was vague in the proposal, but it will tie your key card into your camera system. So if a student were to prop open a door, it would activate an alarm that somebody would get a push notification on the system. There's technology that will tie your key card system into your burglar alarm system, so if a coach comes in at night, goes through the front door, the burglar alarm is automatically shut off while he or she's in the building, and then they reset the keypad on the way out. There's technology in the video technology world that will recognize a firearm in your school. It will activate an emergency push notification once it sees that. So somebody coming in the back door with a gun potentially would save you, doesn't seem like a lot of time, 60 to 90 seconds on an alert. That's a lot of lives to be saved. And the biggest thing that I'd recommend, without going into too much detail, because I know a lot of your security procedures, having spent 28 years in law enforcement, but look at the potential of doing one video camera bridge that all the schools are tied into and your access is restricted by user rights. That way, in a critical emergency, no matter where it is within the SAU, it can be accessed. Also, look at your systems. One of the school districts I worked with was phenomenal in that the video camera layout is a map. And it's mapped according to your police SWAT procedure and your fire department response as well. So when a police officer from Milton that's never in your building has to take over command, they can look at this system and say, on this side, X side of the building, is where the shooter is. Everybody in law enforcement knows that location of the shooter. So it's one map. You can rotate that camera and say, I'm looking at the east side of wall XYZ, or whatever the acronym is used in your SWAT procedure that I'm not going to put out in a public meeting. But this technology that, in a large-scale plan, can make our school district really, really safe, that isn't there tonight. I'll give you an example. 4 times this school year, I've gone to a school building, after-school activities with an unlocked door. That's telling me, or creates the impression, that those students that are inside that unlocked building, because it's after hours, don't matter. And that's a crazy life safety issue. Those doors need to be locked anytime you have students in the building. And it's not happening. Didn't happen last year. It's not happening this year. And this type of technology can make sure it doesn't happen. For instance, if you have a basketball coach in the gym and one of the kids is late, they can ring a bell. There's a portable radio in the gym. Yeah, who's there? Hey, it's Bobby. Okay, I'm going to buzz you in, and he can buzz you in from the radio. A principal has the technology that if he or she has to go into a lockdown from their portable radio, they can announce over the school-wide PA system, lockdown, because he or she may not be in their office. There's technology that will control how doors lock or don't lock, and I'll use the SAU as an example. If the SAU is locked between Henry Wilson and the SAU, and an active shooter hits a fire alarm, by fire code, that door is supposed to unlock. There's software within your video camera system that, under certain circumstances, can override that so that door doesn't become unlocked. And there's technology that within your building, if If you look at your high school, you've got the swinging doors. There's technology that will shut and lock those doors. So if you're looking at a video camera and an active shooter is in between a set of doors, that technology can lock that shooter down in that area and slow him down while you're waiting for or her down while you're waiting for the police response. So while it's good to improve school safety, I think it's better to look at a master plan, decide our priorities, because it was important when we applied for the $350,000 Homeland Security grant. We have access to infrastructure money this year. So if we're going to invest that, let's look at investing it into something that's going to keep our kids safe.
Just to let you know, one of the reasons why we've tabled this is because we're going back to the vendors with questions about that very integration piece.
But I think, and that's great, but I think when you put out a solicitation with certain standards, and then you change the standards, you may not get that same response per se. So if you're going to change the specifications to the greater integration, my recommendation to you would be to go out broader with other companies that deal with it.
Part of the issue that we run into is we put it out. Sometimes you don't get the responses in. Two is that we are looking at how this integrates with the larger pieces that we're looking to do through the performance contract as well. So there's a lot of moving parts here. I don't know if this will be resolved within the next week or so in order to bring it back to the board. I'm hoping. I don't know that it will be. Because, again, as you have said, this is one we want to make sure that we get absolutely right.
And even if you look at your process on your egress road, the budgetary process identified $600,000 and some change for taxpayer relief. Yes, you can legally spend it this year because it's anticipated versus unanticipated last year. But it also identified within that $900,000 the extra for infrastructure improvement. So if you don't, and I don't want you to rush into the program, but look at that $300,000 number and maybe put that in a warrant article for Homeland Security improvements within the building and identify fire alarm, police alarm, key card extras, et cetera. So that money is dedicated to what you want to spend it on versus waiting and tying it up with a performance contract. Because again, what's our timeline? And we've been lucky for 30 years. This last couple of weeks, if you follow the active shooter cases, it was almost on a daily basis. And I hope we never see it, but I hope if it ever does happen, we have the technology and the training in place to minimize that impact. And I think that's an area where I think we're lacking. I think we need serious improvement. And that's where I see the legislative saying, we're giving you infrastructure money. And look at the coincidence of, here's a Homeland grant and what we asked for relief that we didn't get, and almost that same number comes to us in infrastructure improvement monies. You know, they figured out that formula somehow. And I think that's where we closely need to look at. Just because it's in this year's budget, spend it in this year's budget because we need it, but align it with our future, just like in 15 years we're going to need a new school. So let's not piecemeal it. And to go back to the comment about the lockers in the locker room, last year when your budget came before the budget committee added on the lockers or asked you to add it onto your warrant article. If they're that bad and they need to be replaced, don't put Band-Aids on them. Fix them. Because it probably would have been cheaper tying it into what Larry's doing now than to do it in a year and a half, 2 years down the road.
Thank you. Mrs. Barron.
Tim stole a little bit of my thunder. I had great conversation back and forth with Superintendent about the progress on where the MOU is between the selectmen and the school board. And I'm beyond thrilled with how fast and how far it's come. I'm extremely pleased with that. 2 shootings last week, 8 hours apart, 18 hours, whatever. Are we moving forward? Has it stalled, MOU?
The MOU that our attorney helped us draft was sent to Chairman Prue.
Okay.
Her response to me was, and that was a little while ago now, her response to me was that she was going to forward it to Arthur, and they would have discussion about it, but I haven't heard back from her.
Okay, so that's, go ahead. I'll step aside, because he may have an answer.
Came up in conversation today. The MOU is on the agenda tonight for the board's meeting that they're having tonight. What I would propose to this board is, at some point, a joint meeting workshop. It's been talked about.
It was part of, when I sent the MOU, that was part of the request.
Okay.
Yeah.
The other thing I'd put out for a recommendation is you have a school safety committee. I'd highly recommend, if there isn't a school board member on that, I highly recommend a school board member sitting on that. I'd also highly recommend you invite somebody from the town side, being selectmen, to sit on the committee as well. Because our emergency planning on the town side and school side intertwine, and you're gonna see some of the systems move quicker and faster and smoother if everybody is involved in that particular process. Mr. Lewis, you talked about, let's have a meeting with the budget committee and talk about parameters, and it sounded good, but sometimes these joint things don't materialize. And I think when it comes down to the school safety, you sit down in a room for 45 minutes, and I think you can hash out what's taken months on an MOU. And it's amazing that when we want to spend money and an agenda's already published, we can get in front of a board in 3 days. But when it comes to something as critical as the MOU, it's months. And that doesn't make sense to me as a taxpayer.
Well, I got my question answered. Moving on, audits. I've been on the website, on general audits, I don't see 1819, and on single, I don't see 1718, 1819. Are they headed? Do we?
1718's
up there.
been done.
Yeah,
It's up there.
That's
Okay.
been up
On
there
the
since
single?
last spring.
Yes.
Yep.
All right.
I don't believe it's a separate document, though. I think it's part of the.
They
Oh.
were done as a
I think
combined
you have to scroll to the
document.
bottom, Mary.
Okay, because I've got 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17. I'm on
Right,
single.
because 1718 was Plodzik, and they did a combined.
Oh, okay.
I believe that's
So-
together.
All right, so that takes care of that one. And 1819, this is historically about the time that they get published, sent out?
We don't have that
We don't have it back from the auditors
them
yet.
yet, nor have they come in to finish single audit.
Oh, okay.
So
When
it's
we-
it's
when-
not for lack of our asking.
Right.
Oh.
When we switched auditing teams, all of a sudden, we are at the bottom
Oh, yeah,
of the barrel. And so I've asked to have us moved up in the auditing cycle, but right now they have other districts that they've worked with for years who get those earlier auditing slots. So if people drop off, we have a potential to maybe move up in the schedule. But right now, we're kind of stuck with October for our financial and sometime November to January for single.
Okay.
Their
So-
dance card's full, and we're
Yeah.
trying not to be wallflowers.
Obviously, yeah. And you technically have until the end of June to get them done. We hope it doesn't take that long, but I'd love to see.
They've done the field work for the financial one. We're just really waiting for the reports, and we have to go back and kind of, tie out a few things.
This is why I get my things to my accountant in December.
Well, it's not for our not being ready to hand them out, that's for sure.
Anybody else, public? Okay, our next meeting will be next Monday, right here at, I think we're gonna start at 6, but it'll be non-public at 6. So when we get done with non-public, hopefully around 6:30, we'll be back in public session. Thank you to those of you who joined us from home and those of you who came out this evening. A lot of good input tonight from community members, and I appreciate that. I'll entertain a motion to go into non-public session 5 for legal under RSA 91A:3, E and L. So moved by Mr. Lewis, second by Mrs. McElhenney. All those in favor by roll? Aye. Good night, folks.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
you.